Hi, I'm Sarah Bartley. I am the co-founder of Dyslexia St. Louis Learning and Advocacy Center. I'm also the educational advocate here in the center. Today we're going to talk about one of the most common questions we get asked here in the center, and that is, how can I get my child diagnosed with dyslexia? Where do I go, and what professional do I need to see? So there are several professionals that can diagnose dyslexia. One of those is a neuropsychologist. You're going to want to see a neuropsychologist when you have several issues going on with your kiddo. You have concerns in reading and writing, you have concerns in math, you need to know where they are in terms of their full scale IQ, so that cognitive piece of the puzzle, and then any social emotional issues such as ADHD, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, those sorts of things that were behavioral that need to also be addressed. So a neuropsych throws out a really wide net, and their report's going to include all of those pieces. It's going to have some academic testing, some cognitive testing, some social emotional testing, and that's going to give us some of the answers that we're looking for. However, if you are really concerned with reading and writing, then the next step that you're going to want to look at is a comprehensive language evaluation. If you're a family that has already had a neuropsychologist evaluation done, or you've been evaluated through your school district, and you're still seeing concerns primarily in that area of language, reading, writing, it is time to dig in deeper there and see a speech and language pathologist.
Hi, my name is Maggie. I'm a speech language pathologist, and Sarah went in depth regarding a neuropsychological evaluation, but I want to give you a little bit more information on good comprehensive language testing and why that is so important. We used to think that in order to make a dyslexia diagnosis, we needed to look really closely at IQ or intelligence. Current regulations, though, have found that it is most important to look at spoken language skills, that actually a child's ability to read and write is more closely linked to their spoken language skills than it is to intelligence. So while there's value in having a neuropsychological evaluation done, as Sarah mentioned, if your concerns are primarily with reading and writing and spelling, then a comprehensive language and literacy evaluation probably is the direction that you want to go. So food for thought. One of the more common diagnoses that a child has before they get a dyslexia diagnosis is some type of a developmental learning disability. This is a really common diagnosis for a child who's 3, 4, 5 years old, who is a late talker, who's getting speech therapy, and the speech language pathologist is probably going to be the first person who's going to be working with your child. A lot of these children with developmental language disorders go on to meet the criteria of having a diagnosis of dyslexia. So when you're thinking about the role of the speech language pathologist, their role actually begins very early before a child is really ever learning how to read, and then it can follow a child as they start to enter into those pre-emergent literacy phases and then on to actual literacy skills. Something else that's really important to take into consideration is that there is a very high comorbidity or co-occurrence of children that meet the criteria for both dyslexia and a language disorder. It's actually over 55%. So what you need to be thinking about is that, yes, your child might be struggling with reading and writing, but reading and writing are really extensions of spoken language. So if there are areas in your child's spoken language that they are struggling with, and a comprehensive literacy evaluation that is done by a speech language pathologist would reveal those holes, then it's going to be trickling into their reading and their writing skills. So that's also why it's really important to have that language piece really closely looked at.
Here at Dyslexia St. Louis, we do offer a comprehensive language and literacy evaluation which includes dyslexia. So Maggie, what can a parent expect from this evaluation?
So in a comprehensive language and literacy evaluation, we're going to look really closely at those oral or spoken language skills, and then we're going to connect the dots to reading and writing. So we're going to look at word recognition, how well your child is decoding at the single word level. We're also going to look at how quickly they can read, how accurate they are. That's going to give us an idea of how fluent they are. We're going to look closely at their spelling patterns. We're going to do a writing analysis with them. Of course, we're going to look at phonological awareness, which is really critical for any good literacy evaluation. We're going to look at reading comprehension, and of course, we're going to look at their knowledge of vocabulary. How robust is their vocabulary?
So Maggie, can you briefly describe the concerns parents are having when they're calling? Is there a common theme to this?
Yeah, so there are a few common things that I hear from parents when they're calling to inquire about whether or not they need to have an evaluation done. So one of the more common ones is they'll say something like, all I know about dyslexia is that it is reading words backwards. So they automatically link vision to dyslexia. And we actually know from a lot of research that dyslexia is not related to vision, eye testing, tracking eye movements, things of that nature. That's not really what we're looking at when we're looking at dyslexia. Again, we're looking at this language piece. There's a really close relationship between spoken language and literacy. And so when parents understand that dyslexia is not just letter reversals, it's not just seeing words backwards, and you explain to them what do we look at for dyslexia, then they start to say things like, okay, I understand. That is my kid. I do notice that my child has difficulties in that area. The other common one that we hear is that there's concerns about potentially ADHD, or they do have a diagnosis of ADHD. And of course, speech language pathologists don't make an ADHD diagnosis, but it is very common for children with dyslexia to meet the criteria for ADHD. And so when a parent says, we think it's just attention, or the classroom teacher thinks that it just has to do with attention and focus, the vast majority of the time, it's not just ADHD. Most of the time, we're finding that these children have underlying language and literacy deficits. And of course, if you're sitting in a classroom and reading is difficult for you, then attention is going to be poor as well. So we definitely would still recommend looking into that language and literacy piece for that child. And probably the last one that could potentially be the most prevalent one is you're just a speech language pathologist, my kid's already getting speech therapy, so we've ruled that out. Or a parent has sat in an IEP meeting, and one of the areas that they look at to determine whether or not they're going to include it in the evaluation is language. And they sit around the table and they say, are there any concerns with language? And the team agrees, no, there's no concerns with language. And most of the time it's because they can communicate their wants and needs. That's kind of one of the blanket statements that we hear a lot. And so what I will usually say to a parent is, yes, they can communicate their wants and needs. If they couldn't communicate their wants and needs, then you really have a big problem on your hands, right? But when we're talking about language as it relates to literacy, if your child is struggling with reading, there is a problem with language. Dyslexia, by its very definition, is a language-based learning disability. And as we described all of the areas that are included in a language and literacy evaluation, all of these areas need to be comprehensively assessed. So even if you've sat down with your IEP team and they've said, we're not concerned about language, going back to what you originally said, which was, we're not making the progress that we're seeing, that's probably a good time to get a language evaluation done.
So if you are wanting more information about how you can get a comprehensive language and literacy evaluation for your child, you can contact us here at Dyslexia St. Louis at our website, dyslexiastlouis.com, or email us at info@dyslexiastlouis.com.